Welcome along to Film Franchise Fortnights on the Cult Popture Network. What you're about to listen to is part one of our mega Back to the Future trilogy series trilogy of podcasts that we did.
Do you reckon it's funny if they think that you're alone and then I talk and then I'm behind the microphone so they can barely hear me?
Yeah, I think they'll find that real funny. So as we said in the last episode, the SpongeBob episode, this was originally going to be just one podcast, but we had so much to say that we thought, hey, instead of deleting all these opinions, why not just put them in different episodes? So I hope you really enjoy. This one sort of covers how we enjoy the films and how we grew up with them. Thank you for listening and I hope you enjoy it. Bum 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 ba da 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 da. Yeah, come on! I thought you were going to join in there. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Film Franchise Fortnights on the Cult Popture Podcast. I am very excited. Today, we're talking about Back to the Future, the best franchise of all time, and we're joined by Rowan Strang.
Hey guys.
Hey Rowan and Richard's.
Yeah, thank you. I was waiting for my introduction. I'm Richard.
Mm-hmm. So I'm so excited. I'm so excited, guys. This is we've been talking about how we're trying to figure out how to structure this podcast so it's not just a verbal diarrhea of us gushing for this movie series, right?
Yeah.
Back to the Future is probably my favorite franchise of all time.
Well, it's the best one.
It's the best. It's the best one.
Yeah.
I feel like it's the most pure. I feel like there's been no Back to the Future prequels trilogy that has ruined the series and things like that. And anything that has been added has been relatively good and also relatively obscure. So it hasn't taken.
Yeah, it doesn't. Nothing's ruined it.
Exactly. Nothing's ruined Back to the Future. Back to the Future. There is a trilogy of films, of course, consisting of Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3, which came out in 85, 89, and 1990, respectively. And they're directed by Robert Zemeckis, produced by Steven Spielberg, written by Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis, starring Michael J. Fox as Marty McFly, Christopher Lloyd as Doc Brown, and also stars Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, Thomas F. Wilson, and Mary Steenburgen as various characters and various incarnations of the same characters.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a pretty concise summation of the cast.
Thank you. Do you want to do a concise summation of the plots?
Basically, Marty travels back in time by accident in a time machine that the Doc invented in a DeLorean.
Oh, it's so fun.
And then he accidentally stops his parents from meeting, and then he has to get them to fall in love. Basically, that's the first film. Second film, they go to the future, then they go back. And then the third film, they go the Old West. Mm-hmm. Everyone knows these films.
Everyone knows these films, so there's no point talking about them.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. What are you guys? What's your favourite? What's your least favourite? What are your thoughts? What is your favourite Back to the Future movie, and why is it Part 2?
See, it's almost the harder question is almost which is your least favourite.
Yeah.
But to go with favourites, I'm Part 1. Part 1 is easily my favourite.
Cool.
Yeah. Actually,
I'm interested in your favourites. It's Part 2.
For years it was as a purist, I can say Part 1 is probably the best and my favourite. Mm-hmm. But then Part 2 is also my favourite. Mm-hmm. Because growing up, I was
Part
always
3's in the corner
Part 3's you're my third favourite.
Oh man, this is gonna be good.
And so Part 2 is I love the idea of doing a sequel that's the original from a different point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I love that about it. And it's and that they're kind of course correcting constantly to try and make sure that the first film happens.
Yeah.
And that's brilliant.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, prior to rewatching the films for this podcast, if you'd said which is your favourite, I probably would have said Part 2.
Yeah.
But post watching the 3 films, I would put it at the bottom of the 3.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, this is going to be a trek into Back to the Future. So, the general consensus as taken from Rotten Tomatoes is basically first. Actually, it's first is best, third is second best, and second is third best. Which I think is really interesting because I've never heard that perspective before. Yeah, I would expect, just because of the way the world works, for the first one to be the most regarded for semantics. the critic score for the first one is 96 and the audience is 94. The critic score for part 2 is 63 and the audience is 85. And part 3, the critic score is 74 and the audience score is 78.
Oh, so the audience goes 1, 2, 3.
Right. Oh, yeah, true. Yeah. But critics go...
well, that's... Yeah,
1, 3, 2.
I can see how that works, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think Back to the Future Part 2 is a truly unique film.
Yes.
Yeah.
But is partly truly unique because it's got so many problems. It's trying to... Partly it's inherited so many problems. Partly it creates its own problems. And it is just like... It's silly and it's great. I mean, it is great. But what I noticed on the big rewatch was just how much big chunks of Part 2 are a piping hot mess and just don't work. And aren't... in terms of what people got when they saw the first Back to the Future movie, Part 2 is delivering on completely different ideas and pieces of entertainment. And that's why I think Part 3 almost is a return to like the simple idea of what Part 1 is, and minus all of the really interesting parental
I
stuff.
think what I love about Part 2, there's so many things I love about it. I love how complicated it is. I love how you go, the first one's set in the 50s, the third one's set in the Old West, the second one is set across all these different time periods, so there's not a constant theme to it. I guess you could say it's the future one, but even that
It's only like the
It's
first
the future
act.
first 10, 15 minutes. And
I really love that the phrase "Back to the Future" means something different in the second one.
Yeah, I love the use of the title.
Yeah.
Because it's so ingrained in our heads now, Back to the Future. It doesn't sound weird.
Yeah.
But like I remember hearing it for the first time, I was like, how do they go back to the future? Because you go back in time, you go to the past. And it's so, like, it's used so beautifully.
it speaks so perfectly to what the films are about.
Yes. So if you haven't seen the films in a long time, the first and third both are he goes to the past, they have to go back to the future or the present, right? The second film is they go to the future, something happens that destroys the past, so they have to go back to the past, then back to the future, then back to the past again it's all complicated and fixed and they have to stop alternate timelines. I love it so much.
On that note, right, Back to the Future Part 1, and it's just Back to the Future though, isn't it? It's
Yes,
not Part 1.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Back to the Future might be one of the best uses ever of the title of the film being said by a character in the film.
Yeah.
That moment where Doc goes, and my boy, whatever, we're sending you back to the future. Like, that is perfect.
Yeah.
And then, like, you know, by contrast, we saw Suicide Squad last night, and it's like, well, we're some kind of Suicide Squad. So it's like, no. So films more often than not, screw that up completely. And I think Back to the Future, it is not just, oh, there's the title. It's like, that is a great moment.
We've talked about titles quite a bit on this podcast, and I think because since this is a podcast about the art of a franchise, titling is a very important
Becomes
part.
a big deal, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember when I was a kid finding out that the alternate title for Back to the Future Part 2 was Paradox, right? And
is that like colon paradox?
No, just so Back to the Future Paradox.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember thinking at the time, I wish they'd called the whole series Paradox. Because it's such a better title. Now I'm 23 and I'm like, no. Back to the Future is an excellent title because of how naturally it flows into the dialogue. Because it's an inherently flawed statement. Because it's it's ironic, it's funny.
Do you reckon that whole train of thought there is because as a kid, and I'm just partly also speaking for how I feel about the films, as a kid you watch the films and you're like, this is such an awesome science fiction adventure. And then as a plus 20-year-old, you go, they are hilarious.
Yeah.
Especially the first one. Like, that is so funny. And it really is. Yeah, I never saw them particularly as comedies as a kid. They were just amazing science fiction movies.
So, I have a deep appreciation for it in that respect, I think, because I don't remember when I saw the first one. I remember really liking it. I remember months later, my parents got the second one out on videotape for me. And I was like, this is crazy. Did they film it like this? If you go back and watch the first one, can you see Marty crawling up the top of the stage?
Yeah.
Like this, and then the third one, I fell off a shed and cut my toe open. And to try and stop me from crying, my parents got me the third one out from the video shop, right? And what I think I love about Back to the Future is I reckon I saw them when I was about 7. I reckon they were the first movies that made me fall in love with film. Like, I can't think of one before it where everything people love about film is exemplified as perfectly and as articulately in what I love about Back to the Future. And it's hard for me to figure out how to word that, right? Like, I've thought about this a lot, and especially with like Rick and Morty coming out and how it's a very thinly veiled parody of Back to the Future. And what I think I like most about Back to the Future and the way Robert Zemeckis directed it, which I haven't seen done in any other movie except for maybe Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is also a Zemeckis film, is that these movies are like real life cartoons. Right, I've thought about what I like most about the series. It's not necessarily the story, though that is great. It's not necessarily the direction. It's not necessarily the cinematography, which is okay. Like, it's the acting. It's the delivery of lines.
It's the characters.
Yeah, it's the characters. But how they deliver those lines. It's how they deliver lines like, "You're George McFly." You know, it's the cadence in his voice. It's and like we were talking the other day, Richard, about like 2 McFlys with the same gun. Like, these movies are juicy dialogue, juicy delivery. Like, it's like a stage play. You know, like but at the same time, it doesn't feel like you're watching hammy stage acting. It feels like you're watching actors deliver dialogue that they are giddy about delivering. You know, they have thought so much about how they're going to deliver each line, right down to the tone of voice, and like, I think it's perfect.
Rob and Bob do write a script that just sings, like just the dialogue.
Yeah.
I would almost love to see Back to the Future 1 as a piece on Broadway or something.
It is.
You know? Has that been done?
Yeah, it has been.
That's not a surprise.
I found
it just
it out
makes
about
sense. Yeah,
an hour ago.
It is awesome. I would love to see that.
We're just talking about. Sorry to interrupt your 3-minute monologue. But we're talking about the first time we saw the films. Well, the first time I ever saw it, and I remember it was on. I think it was on TV. It was Colgate Saturday Night Feature, or whatever, which we've already talked about. It was Back to the Future, and my parents were like, "Richard, you're old enough to watch this film," and it wasn't like, "Oh, it's not appropriate for little kids." It's like, they knew I would love this film, and they were like, "You have to be. We don't want to show this to you when you're too young to appreciate it." And then so they're like, and then they came on. They're like, "Richard, sit down. You will love this film." And I put it on, and I fell in love with it completely. Yeah. And then. For so long, like every time we walk past Blockbuster, I'd be like, "Can we get Back to the Future 2? Can we get it? Can we get it?" And we never did. And then 2 weeks after they played Back to the Future on TV2 or whatever, they played Back to the Future 3. Weird. They never played Back to the Future 2, and I was like, "Oh," I was like, wanted to watch it, but I was like, I haven't seen the second one, so it won't make sense. And it opened with, "I'm back from the future," which like is a direct continuation to the end of the first one in a way. And I was like,
so good.
What?
Wait, sorry, are you saying that you saw Back to the Future 3 before you saw
I saw the first like 2 minutes of it, and I was like, "No, this doesn't make sense. What?" And then I was like, I turned it off, and I had to
awesome though, right?
And I had to go back and watch the second one.
And
I like made my parents get it out the next day. I was like, I have to watch these other 2 films. Why is he back?
Yeah.
I would posit that as a way better version of a sequel that they could have made, though. Yeah. By just going for the end of part 1, and then don't pick up with future Doc and Marty. Pick up with past Doc and have future Marty just run in and come off the back of an adventure. Skip, because really, part 2 is all course correction on how badly they screwed up the teaser at the end of number 1. Like they're just like, "Oh god, how the fuck do we make a movie?
Why is Jennifer with her?"
Everyone knows that, right? So okay, I'll very quickly recap how I first experienced the film, because I think there's one nugget there that's worth hearing. I saw number 1, I don't know, but it must have just been at the perfect age. I remembered everything about seeing that film for the first time, like the room we were in, the configuration where the fire was on, the TV was there. It was my auntie was babysitting me and my brother. We watched it for the first time. I remember very specifically this very slow entrance with the clocks, which is just amazing.
The pacing.
At the time, it was like, I think I remember that because it was like boring. And then the film starts and you get the skateboarding and the music, and it was just, I was sold. An amazing experience for the first film. And then it must have been some short period after that, my dad, we were picking up firewood from a friend of my dad's, and Dad said, "Oh, the boys watched Back to the Future 1 for the first time or whatever," and they were like, "Oh yeah, they're great, hey." And then they proceeded to tell us in broad strokes what happened in the second and third one. And as a kid, I remember thinking when they said in the third one they go back to the old, like they go back to the Western times. I remember thinking, whatever, you're lying. That can't be. Like I saw that they go to the future at the end of the first one. So yeah clearly the next one's all about the future, but the old West, no. And then that's exactly what it is, and it works.
Yeah. I think that's really a really cool way to look at the series, because so I thought about this when I rewatched them for the podcast, and I've got 2 real good theories for the first 2 films. Haven't quite worked out the third film, and it's all about like the narrative style, right? So like Back to the Future 1 is a Chekhov's gun wet dream. Like that entire movie is set up, payoff, like with tiny things. You know, we all know. I won't go into the trivia Twin Pines Mall to Lone Pines Mall,
yeah.
etc. And then like obviously more more resonating like set pieces are reflected. The movies are set up in a reflection of everything that happens. The second one is cause and effect, right? So there's not as much setup in the second one, but we've got this 10-minute mission to do. But because of the results of this 10-minute mission, we've now got this 10-minute, and Back to the Future 2 is a bunch of mini adventures, whereas the first one's like, we've got to get the clock tower to strike. Like it's a very clear story, whereas the narrative of Back to the Future 2 is a bunch of mini stories that feed into each other. And the third one, I haven't quite... I want to come up because I want to do like a video series on these and try and talk about the narrative.
Well, it's almost the perfect blend of the two.
Yeah. Okay, that's a cool way to put it. That's the
way the third... I mean, I'm just spitballing, but because you have a return to the classic, what is Back to the Future Part 1, but this time Doc they're both well and truly in for the ride together. They're both out of time. Sorry, I don't know what's going on there.
That's cool. I started watching Back to the Future 3 last night, and it started, and all I could think was, this would have been so exciting at the time.
Yeah.
Imagine you've seen the first two, you're at the cinema, you're in the 80s, you're the biggest fan of Back to the Future. The way the third one starts is so richly exciting. Like, the tone of it, it's howdy doody time, and Doc wakes up, he's like, howdy doody time! Like, it's so fun, and you can feel that rumble of like, I'm watching the conclusion to Back to the Future.
Yeah, well, like, it's interesting though that like, when they made the first one, they weren't planning on having a sequel. They're like, roads where we were going, there was a joke. They're like, there's no, and then they've said they regret putting Jennifer in the car. If they knew they were going to make a sequel, they wouldn't have put her in the car. And then the other second two were filmed back to back, and there's a lot of
connections
between the two.
A lot of setups for the Western thing.
Then and they really feel like a dull package, and then it's like, because there's things like him being called chicken, that's only introduced in the second one, and it's such a huge thing, and it's like, that's his emotional arc over the 3 films, even though it's not introduced in the first one. And then
same with Needles.
Needles. They're like, remember Needles? No, because he didn't exist until now.
Chicken is such a big part of 2 and 3, and it sucks so badly. I hate it so much.
It's such a massive character. It's such a fundamental character flaw that
they never even. There's a hint of it in the first one that I feel like they maybe went, because they needed some sort of character arc for Marty, and they found something that was. When I was watching number 1, there was a moment, I can't remember what it was, that reminded me. It was like, maybe they took that and they're like, we can kind of pretend that was a seed and we planted it and we'll extrapolate that on, and we'll make his whole thing a chicken. But I feel like it's blasphemy because so much of me wants to say these films are perfect. But what I would say is that the first one is about a boy and his dad. I think it's about a guy who's ashamed of his father, finds out that his father is actually really similar to him, and actually has an instrumental part in it's about acceptance of your lineage. I think at the risk of cutting you off, I would almost say it's, if not more, as much about a boy and his mum, because we open the film with Marty being the sexual being, and then the film is this shock discovery that, oh god, my mum is totally. As much of a sexual being as I was, whereas his dad's not a sexual being at all. Like, he almost can't relate to his dad. His mum is way closer to him than he even realised.
On that subject, I'd also like to point out that if I went back in time, and my mum was Leah Thompson, I'd probably still go there.
Yeah, like if AJ's mum was Leah Thompson, I would bang.
I would say we would all agree on that one.
Yeah, we would bang your mum if she was Leah Thompson.
Without getting creepy, this is something I never appreciated as a kid and have appreciated in the last 5 years. Leah Thompson is gorgeous in Back to the Future. In a way that in none of the films from my child, I still don't see Princess Leia as sexual on any level.
She's an old lady.
Well, she is pretty in in the original Star Wars, but I still don't see her in a sexual light at all. Leah Thompson is gorgeous, and the 50s setting it all just like.
I believe a man should stand up for his girl. It's like, oh my god, Leah Thompson, I would stand up for you.
I never, as a kid, I never even got the awkward what Marty is experiencing. It's only awkward because he's attracted to her on. Not even some level, but it's like kind of blatant. He's, you watch it in HD and he's glancing down at her tits and stuff. That's And also, like, where's the franchise? Where are there any franchises at the height of Back to the Future's powers that deal with things that are even close to that?
Disney actually rejected the pitch because they were like,
totally believe it.
Don't want to do a movie about
an
a guy
incest
who's
movie.
incestuous with his mum. Yeah, which I that's the one thing I remember about watching it for the first time was looking at my parents and being like, "Does his mum like him?" And they were like, "Yeah," and I was
funny?
like, "What?" It's so weird, but it works so well, and it's
because she's attracted to her own genes.
Yeah,
It makes sense, really.
It's such a strangely
logically.
it's such a strangely taboo subject shoved into this fun family movie.
Yeah.
But do you guys want to talk about
Very quickly, you said it's almost you feel like it's blasphemy to say that there's anything wrong with the Back to the Future movies.
Yeah.
I reckon these movies are the amazing, great movies they are because they work in spite of some...
Yeah.
Especially
that's the
part
thing.
2. Part 2 works in spite of everything about it being a complete train wreck.
Yeah, they're so perfectly flawed.
Yeah.
It's like these movies, and I watched a great video that someone talking about, you say like movies are so bad they're good. Can a movie be so good that it's bad? And he was talking about like, you see movies that are so technically perfect in every way that you just can't resonate with emotionally. Mm-hmm. Like Back to the Future is human because it's flawed, and I can relate to it. And it's like it's so
that's awesome.
like intertwined with my soul because it has its own flaws, and I love it so much.
Everything about 2015 Back to the Future Part 2 sucks. It's stupid. It's really lame. They've come out and they're gone, like, let's just pile on the kind of the comedy elements.
Yeah.
It's not clever comedy the way the first movie was. It's just layers and layers of stupid like stuff. And the rest of the film kind of manages to explode out the back of that and become really cool. And but even like alternate 1985 is really silly and really kind of
Trump's
hilarious.
America.
Yeah, it's like well, let's have Marty come back to 1985, and it's like the worst 1985 imaginable, and it's all silly. But the movie ultimately is so worth watching, kind of almost because of how stupid it is in places.
What's you guys' least favorite part of any of the movies? Because I've got mine.
Right.
In Back to the Future Part 2, when George McFly knocks out Biff, and that guy thinks that he took his wallet. I fucking hate that guy.
I think he took his wallet. Did he take his wallet?
I think he took his wallet.
I think he took his wallet.
Hey, that guy, I think he took your wallet. And then he looks at him real proudly. He's like, I think he took your wallet. And he looks at someone, he's like, yeah, I think he took his wallet.
Such a weird thing to drill down in on.
I watched Back to the Future 2 with my flatmate, and when that guy came up, Adam was like, I love this guy.
Why is that in there? What consequence does it have that this one guy thinks he took his wallet? No one listens to him.
I think I think my least favourite parts are probably the just chunks of 2015. Yeah, it's so weird, and it's so not a sequel to the first Back to the Future.
But neither's the third one.
In terms of tone and style. Well, yeah, but the third one, I think once you get all three of them, they just together become, this is the Back to the Future franchise. And it always should have been this way, and it should always be this way, and it's great for exactly what it is. But Back to the Future Part 2 just isn't a sequel to Back to the Future Part 1. It might, it's the same characters and it's continuing the journey, but everything that really makes Back to the Future 1 an amazing movie isn't really present in Back to the Future Part 2.
Well, what I'll sort of, not really a rebuttal, because we sort of agree with each other regardless. What I would say to that though, and this is still in line with what my least favourite part is I think the strongest part of Back to the Future 2 is that it's about a book. You know what I mean? It's about the sports almanac.
It's the
MacGuffin?
Yeah.
I love that it's got its own MacGuffin. You don't see that in a sequel lots.
It's a really cool concept that they explore.
And it's I remember, maybe this is something my parents told me, I feel like at one point someone I know what it is. When I first watched Back to the Future 2, I remember he walks past the grey sports almanac in the window, and I was like, what's that? And my dad was like, that's what the whole movie's about. And it's like,
it's a cool
sports almanac.
And I like,
heard him, ladies. Party's over.
And I like that that's not even part of the third one. You know, it's this isolated thing that drives the second film along. And what I don't like about the third one, forgive me, Back to the Future God, is that Clara is that for the third film. They bring in this foreign element, but because it's a person and because the series is so tied into characters recurring and playing as new, I don't think there are any characters in Back to the Future 2 that aren't actors except for Crispin Glover in the first one, but they move around that by making George McFly dead, and that's the point, right?
Yeah.
And I don't like that. I almost don't like that Mary Steenburgen isn't a character in the first two in any way. Like, she's the motivator, and I think that because they build this story around being recurring elements, it doesn't quite work for me. And she's kind of an annoying character. And kind of
every time she gets on the train, I'm like, don't do it!
Why didn't they just take her back to the future with them, though? Because she was meant to be dead anyway, but she would have solved all the problems. She was like, leaving her there was potentially they could have got to an even more fucked up 1985.
That's true.
Because they changed that one small thing. Anyway,
they
should have taken her back with her. She was in love with the doc, and that would have worked. Because here's the thing, I quite enjoyed the love story.
I like the love
that
story.
element.
Yeah,
it was cool to bring. The movies. This is the power of love, man. The movies are all about the power of love.
Yeah, man.
And it was cool to finally put that. Just I don't know. Yeah. I feel like this whole time I've been taking for granted all of that sports almanac concept stuff from Back to the Future Part 2, just because it is like what you... And that is an amazing part. That is what makes Back to the Future 2.
Because
like,
it's what we all would do.
It's such a great time travel concept to explore.
Yeah.
But I feel like that represents the best of Back to the Future Part 2 in that it's a really cool... action, science fiction, adventure movie.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have any of the comedy and kind of heart that Back to the Future 1 has. That is for me, which is what makes Back to the Future 1 one of the greatest movies.
I like the darkness with it, though.
Yeah.
I could believe that.
Empire Strikes Back of Back to the Future.
Yeah. I like that Biff would have shot George and would kill Marty. Like, I believe that. It's not like an unreasonable thing.
It comes back to the cartoon thing you were saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
they're all kind of cartoon characters. And then that Lorraine would presumably shoot Biff at some point in the future, which is why he gets when he gets Back to the Future.
Cool. Whoop whoop. Hope you guys enjoyed that first part of our Back to the Future podcast. We will be back next week, not in one fortnight, don't worry. We'll be back next week with part 2. Which covers continue the franchise segment where the three of us try to come up with a better way to better ways to continue the franchise than each other's ideas.
Do you reckon it's funny if I did that thing that I did in the intro?
I think it's definitely like comedy. Comedy's all about repetition, so it probably works. So yeah, tune in for that one. It's really funny, and just like the Back to the Future trilogy, the second one is my favourite.